Imagine waking up before sunrise. The air is cold. The ground is damp. A thin mist moves slowly across the camp. Around you, dozens of soldiers are already awake, some sharpening weapons, others quietly preparing their gear. Today is the day of battle. But before you can fight, you have to become something else, a knight in armor. And that process was far more difficult than most people imagine, because medieval armor wasn't just a costume you could quickly put on. It was a complicated system of metal plates, straps, padding, and joints that had to be assembled piece by piece. And you couldn't do it alone. Real knights often needed help, sometimes from a servant, sometimes from a squire. The process could take several minutes, sometimes longer. And it always started with something surprising. Not metal, but cloth. First came a thick padded garment worn underneath everything else. It covered most of the body and was designed to absorb shock from blows and prevent the metal armor from rubbing directly against the skin. Without this layer, the armor would be almost impossible to wear. The padding protected the body from bruises, cuts, and the constant pressure of heavy steel plates pressing against bone and muscle. But there was a downside. It was extremely warm. Even before the metal armor was added, the padding alone could make a person sweat, especially during summer. But the real weight was still coming. Next came the leg armor. Metal plates attached with leather straps were fastened around the thighs and shins. These pieces were carefully shaped so the knight could still bend his knees and walk. Then came the arm protection. Long metal plates covering the forearms and elbows. Each joint had to move correctly. If something was too tight, the knight wouldn't be able to swing a sword properly. If it was too loose, it could shift during combat. Everything had to fit perfectly. Then came one of the largest pieces, the breastplate, a thick steel plate protecting the chest and stomach. This piece was incredibly important. Most deadly strikes in battle were aimed toward the center of the body. The breastplate was designed to deflect blows and protect vital organs, but it also added significant weight. As each new piece was attached, the knight could feel the pressure increasing. The armor pressed against the shoulders. The hips carried more weight. The body slowly became heavier. A full suit of armor could weigh around 20 to 25 kilograms. That's roughly 45 to 55 pounds. But here's something surprising. The weight wasn't as unbearable as many people think, because well-made armor distributed the weight across the entire body. It didn't hang only on the shoulders like a backpack. Instead, the weight was spread between the hips, torso, and legs. This allowed trained knights to move more freely than most people expect. In fact, historical experiments have shown that armored fighters could run, climb, and even mount horses without assistance. But that didn't mean it was comfortable. Far from it. After wearing armor for long periods, fatigue started to build. Muscles worked harder. Every movement required more energy. Even walking became more exhausting. And the worst part was still coming. The helmet. The moment the helmet was placed on the knight's head, everything changed. The world suddenly became smaller. Vision was restricted to narrow openings called eye slits. Peripheral vision almost disappeared. You could see what was directly in front of you, but everything to the sides became harder to notice. That could be extremely dangerous during battle, because attacks often came from unexpected directions. Hearing also became muffled. The thick metal around the head blocked much of surrounding noise. And inside the helmet, one sound became very clear: your own breathing. Each breath echoed inside the metal shell. Slow, heavy, loud. And as time passed, the air inside the helmet began to grow warmer. Sweat started forming on the forehead, then on the face. But wiping it away wasn't easy. Your hands were covered in metal gauntlets. Even the smallest movement required effort. And this was all happening before the battle had even started. Now imagine standing in a field surrounded by hundreds of other armored soldiers. The sun rising higher in the sky. The temperature climbing. Your armor slowly heating under the sunlight. Metal absorbs heat quickly. And soon the armor begins to feel like a heavy oven wrapped around your body. Sweat builds under padding. Your clothes stick to your skin. Breathing becomes heavier. But the army begins to move. Orders are shouted. Drums beat in the distance. The enemy approaches. And suddenly the calm preparation turns into chaos. Swords clash. Shields collide. Arrows fly through the air. The battlefield becomes loud, confusing, and terrifying. Now every movement matters. Running becomes harder with the added weight. Turning quickly requires effort. And every strike you make drains more energy. But the armor is doing its job. Blows that would normally cut deep into flesh now glance off hardened steel. Swords scrape across metal plates. Axes slam against armor, but fail to break through. Without armor, many of these strikes would be fatal. But armor had its weaknesses too. Joints were vulnerable. Armpits, neck openings, and small gaps between plates could still be targeted. Experienced fighters knew this. They aimed carefully, searching for openings. And if a knight fell to ground, things could become extremely dangerous, because getting up quickly while wearing armor wasn't always easy, especially if the ground was muddy, or if enemies were nearby. Despite what movies sometimes show, knights were not helpless when they fell, but standing up still took effort, and every second spent on the ground increased the risk, because on a chaotic battlefield, hesitation could be deadly. Still, armor remained one of the greatest advantages a medieval warrior could have. It could turn a deadly strike into a harmless blow. It could mean the difference between life and death. But it came with a price. Weight, heat, fatigue, limited vision, restricted breathing, and constant pressure on the body. Wearing armor for hours during a battle required incredible physical endurance. Knights had to train their body for years to fight effectively while carrying so much metal. Without training, most people would become exhausted very quickly, and that's something modern audiences often misunderstand. Medieval armor didn't turn knights into slow, clumsy statues, but it also didn't make fighting easy. It made survival possible. Barely. Behind every suit of shining armor was a human body working under intense stress, muscles burning, lungs struggling for air, eyes searching through narrow slits, and every movement reminding the warrior the heavy steel wrapped around him. So the next time you see a knight in full armor, remember this. That shining steel wasn't just protection. It was a burden, one that every medieval warrior had to carry into battle, and sometimes it was the only thing keeping them alive.